Welcome to the Ben and Lauren Show. I'm Ben, and this is Lauren, and here we are, another evening.
Well, it is Saturday evening. It's not Sunday, Monday,
We're getting a little bit better
Tuesday.
than to actually do the Saturday night podcast.
We gotta stick with it.
We'll try. We're going to try. So what did we do this week that was exciting and fun?
You want to stick with what we did this week?
Well, we were home a lot this week.
We said
Again,
that last week.
we're always home a lot. We're boring people.
Well, okay. We got a little glimpse of spring. We saw the first robin.
Yes, we did. It was an amazing thing because we were sitting at the table over there, and Lauren out of nowhere says, "Oh, listen!" I'm like, "What?" So she opens up the door wall, and there's this robin just chirping away.
I hear a robin call through walls when it's springtime.
We're like, "It's spring!" Although it's not spring, it's basically snowing outside.
Well, it snows and then melts, and we had a day this week that was over 60.
Yeah, it was nice.
That we get those every once in a while in March.
It goes from really windy to rainy to snowing to melted. That's spring for
We had
us.
another bomb cyclone this week. Turns out a bomb cyclone is just a thunderstorm.
Bomb cyclone.
My mom told me that apparently weather events are being given names like that right now because if your house takes any damage in a storm and you try to report it to an insurance company, unless they have a recognized storm on record that happened in your area, the insurance company will not cover damage to your house.
So you have to have a bomb cyclone
So
on record.
what apparently is happening is that the Weather Channel is assigning these names to these big storms so that people can actually have a name to report. That's the scuttlebutt. I think personally that when you have a channel devoted to 24 hours of weather, the people go around like this unless they come up with something really exciting to talk about.
And I'll tell you, the Weather Channel puts fear into people. It's astounding. I mean, if you watch the Weather Channel, you're going to be convinced that, this weather pattern is going to come in and destroy your home.
That's the way they keep people to stay tuned in to the Weather Channel.
It's those radar images with the bright red and the orange and the yellow, and then you get into the real deep and it becomes like white.
Well, and I think it's basically designed to scare the life out of elderly people.
It works
Every
too.
elderly person we know gets terrified by the Weather Channel.
Yep. It's
to the
scary.
point where they won't go anywhere and they don't want us to go anywhere either.
Yeah, it's scary.
They're like, guys, it's a rainstorm. We've been out in rainstorms before.
But wind.
But there's going to be wind. Yeah,
and rain.
It said 30 to 40 mile an hour wind. I mean, we're not even talking gusts. We're not even talking anything too terrible here. Anyway.
We're survivors. We can take it.
It was not much of anything. We heard thunder twice and some rain.
I thought it was neat.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
We opened up the door well and listened to the rain a little bit.
Yeah, that felt like spring that day. And girls rode their bikes all afternoon.
Yeah, they loved it. It was fun.
Ran around the yard till they got muddy.
So we got a package in the mail recently.
Which one do you want to look at?
Well,
we got a bunch of stuff in the mail this week.
We got this. If you can see it.
There, yeah.
Recognize that logo?
Well, we got
Papa Pepper Make It Rain.
We got a special package. We can't talk too much about what's in it because it's a birthday present.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to spoil anything. Well, we can talk about... Oh, no. It's a surprise.
That's a surprise, just in case your dad sees it. Of course, you know what? We're going to give it to him tomorrow. He's not going to see this before then.
So what we ordered is some Sugar Rush peach peppers. We
read about these in the Baker Creek catalog, and turned out Papa Pepper had grown them and had seeds for sale. We decided to buy them from him. And we bought them for Dad because he likes to buy spicy peppers and make pepper jelly out of them. And every year he grows jalapenos. But when we read the description of these peach peppers, we thought Dad would really like these. Apparently they're sweet and they have a lot of really good flavor and they have just kind of like a low level heat. So they're not super, super spicy, but they're still spicy.
I'm looking forward to trying them. I mean, come on, Sugar Rush peach peppers? How cool is that?
I think that's neat. Plus the seeds are savable. It's a heritage plant, so you can save the seeds. And then Papa Pepper felt bad that he was sending us one.
Great job.
He called us up and he wanted to know, was there anything else we wanted? And we're like, well, we don't have very much room to grow anything. So yeah, we just want peppers.
He gets coolness points for this. That's just neat.
So he was talking to us about what else we'd seen in the Baker Creek catalog, and he sent us a variety of melons here. The Qatari melon, or Kajari melon, I can't remember which one it's called.
Kajari?
I think if it's the one I'm thinking of, it's really neat. It's orange and green, and apparently the fruit inside has all
Probably look
different
at the Baker
stripes.
Creek catalog and see.
And then the Tommy Apple melon, and apparently Tommy Apple is famous for his breeding of his heritage plants. And then melon golden crispy. I'm not familiar with that one.
Baker Creek from Jackie's
Kitchen
Kitchen and
and
more.
more. Hmm.
So
So
we're excited about these.
we'll give melons a try. I think we're gonna have to do some thoughtful we're gonna have to do some thoughtful planting to find a spot where we can get them, where we can trellis them up so they have room, and then we can get the dirt rich enough to actually get the melons. And then we got to figure out how to keep the squirrels from stealing them.
We drew a watermelon last couple years ago, and the squirrels just ate them up.
Every time the watermelon got to about golf ball size,
They'd
squirrel
steal
would
them.
make off with it. And they broke the vines too.
We had one watermelon grow about the size of maybe a softball, a little bit bigger. That's about as much as it got before the squirrel knocked it off. So we cut it open, and it smelled nice, but
It wasn't ripe yet.
it wasn't ripe.
Plus, I think part of the problem was we weren't getting a lot of melons set on the vine because our soil is really nutritionally poor.
We're still working on the soil.
We're working on it. I'm hoping for some rabbit
Rabbit
manure
manure.
this year. We have a little trailer now. We can go get it.
You just have to find it.
And we got our Baker Creek seeds. So Ben wants to start them all right away, and I had to talk him out of it because we still have a good 8 weeks before we can really plant most things.
Well, we have a 60-degree day, and it's like, all right, let's start getting these things growing. And we watch all the YouTubers down south that are starting
Everybody
everything.
down south. But what we have to remember is our late frost date is May 15th.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned through experience, you don't really want to plant most things in the ground. The ground's too cold before then. And if you try to plant your seedlings, they will almost inevitably get frosted.
I think that's why
We
people
lose
move
them.
down south, so they can have a longer planting season.
So we're probably going to start our peppers and tomatoes inside this next week. We got jalapenos. I'm really excited about those. Non-spicy jalapenos,
That's
which
going to be
means
great.
I can throw tons of them in our food and our kids won't complain, and we get all that nice jalapeno
And
flavor.
there's quite a few seeds in here.
And we've got a tokanashi turnip, which apparently they have really sweet, not very woody turnips, so you can grow those.
I'm
And
excited.
they have good greens. They're known for their greens.
I'm excited for this. Tatsoi.
That's a spinach-like green. And we got these really yummy looking big German cucumbers. These are deli pickling cucumbers, and we really enjoy pickles.
Yeah.
So these are known to be very crispy and very flavorful. And they're just a good old-fashioned pickle with lots of bumps on them.
Oh, we got a bonus here.
Oh, yeah, cinnamon basil.
We got some cinnamon
I
basil.
have no idea what cinnamon basil is.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got some beans and some carrots and a Rebecca Allen tomato. This one actually has mixed reviews from people who tried to grow it. And
It looks beautiful, though.
we weighed our options about whether we should try, but apparently it has disease resistance, which is unusual for an heirloom tomato. And it's known to be an excellent yielder, is what we read. So the reviews, some people said they got really good tomatoes out of it. Other people said it didn't do anything. So we decided to gamble, and if it doesn't work, we'll try a new tomato plant next year.
It'll be fine.
We won't save the seeds.
It'll be fine.
So
I think it's going to be really good. So we got a nice collection of seeds for the spring.
Yep.
Put these
So
away.
it's exciting to be getting heritage seeds because we can't usually save anything. And like we only can grow one, our garden is so small that if we grow heritage tomatoes, we can only grow one variety of tomato. Because if we grow anything else, it will cross-pollinate. And we learned that from the Hungarian pinks, and it will eventually just kind of destroy your tomato stack if they have a bigger garden than ours to grow multiple types of tomatoes.
So speaking of Mr. Papa Pepper, this is a Papa Pepper heavy podcast because something else came in the mail today.
We got
There it is. 50 days to understanding the end times more accurately.
He's been working on this book for a while, and we've been enjoying his spiritual food for thought videos.
Yep.
So, when somebody you know publishes a book, you kind of want to get
a
it
copy
and read
of it. So after 50 days, we'll read the whole thing, and then we'll tell you what we think about it. But we have to read the whole thing before we can really review it. And then we'll leave an Amazon review and see. We'll probably be the only one for a little while.
I'm
Oh,
not generally that interested in end times prophecy, in that I always feel like you're kind of drowning in a sea of possibilities.
well, I think what's nice about this is it's mostly going to talk about things to look for. That's what I'm guessing. And maybe theorizing about what different elements of end times.
It's very, very scripture heavy. It looks like he
Yeah.
basically has put together a lot of scriptures that deal with this time.
I mean, I'm looking at this and all the scriptures in bold.
It's mostly just
So we're looking at about
bold.
50% scripture and the rest commentary on the scripture. So that's a good sign. It's good.
So we'll have to give that a read through.
Hmm.
What else happened this week?
Well, mom and dad are coming home tomorrow.
Ah, yes, they've been
We're
gone
gonna
for a month.
yeah. It's been a whole month since they've left,
Yeah,
and we're gonna have a special meal prepared for them. We're gonna have corned beef. And
they're coming home on St. Patrick's Day.
do we have cabbage?
We do. We have potatoes and we have carrots. We have and onions. We have everything we need.
Learned something interesting about St. Patrick. He kept the seventh-day Sabbath.
He was a Torah keeper.
He also advocated keeping the feast to the best of the ability back then.
And also, pop quiz. He wasn't Irish, so what was he?
He was Scottish.
I
You would
thought
assume St. Patrick is
I
about as
always thought
Irish
he
as
was.
they get, right?
I always thought he was German. I didn't realize he was Scottish.
Well,
I knew he wasn't
that's
Irish.
what the internet says anyway.
Oh yeah, the
The
internet.
internet says.
Well, what site on the internet said that?
Don't worry about it. The internet.
Sources.
Reliable sources say.
That sounds pretty dodgy. That might be fake news.
Anyway, we'll find. We'll have to do some further research. But Scotland. He was Scottish.
Considering that the Irish look down on the Scots like you would not believe. I mean, my Irish grandmother used to say things like, well, the Irish gave the Scots the bagpipes as a joke, and the Scots haven't gotten it yet. she she was so disparaging of the Scots. So what did I do? I went and married one.
I'm not really a Scots.
Oh,
Come on.
well, yeah, you're a good quarter Scots.
Quarter?
Yeah,
I'm not a quarter anything.
yeah. I think we
Maybe.
worked it out. That's about what you are.
Well, maybe. I don't know. She's never seen me in my kilt. She's never heard me play bagpipes.
I don't think you've ever worn a kilt. Although that would be fun.
Moving on.
I was raised by Irish
Oh, brother.
grandparents.
Don't like the direction this is going.
I won't tell you the story of why the Seattle Underground has windows in the ceiling.
What? Oh. I was not expecting this to make the left turn it just made.
Anyway,
Your face is turning red.
because it reminded me about why the Seattle Underground has windows in the ceiling.
So anyway, let's see. We've been decluttering the house, getting stuff cleaned up,
Since we've,
throwing things away.
since we've been home so much, one of the things we've really been doing is working on streamlining our house.
Hmm.
We put a lot of garbage out at the curb this week.
And it feels good.
Oh, it feels great.
Throw things away. And there's a lot more to throw away. I'm looking around seeing stuff to throw away right now.
Right. Well, when we first were married, neither one of us really had any experience keeping a house. And I tended to move lighter than Ben, meaning I kept fewer things. Ben liked to keep a lot of things. But as time has gone by and it's become apparent what we use and what we don't, those things really get in the way of living your life.
It's funny, things that I thought that we would probably not use, we use all the time. And things that I figure would be really valuable, good to hold on to, it's like, this is just taking up space. Let's get rid of it.
Well, and when we finished construction on our house, it was like a hurricane had gone through. We had a house that was full of a lot of Grandma Lila's stuff, and we had all kinds of odds and ends that we really had no idea what to do with. We had, out of our house, we have 3 bedrooms in our house. We have 3 bathrooms in our house, which is really unusual for this area. Out of those bedrooms, we had one that was usable. The other 2 were full of all kinds of weird bits and pieces of this and that and whatever. The closets were full of
Junk,
junk. Grandma's bathroom was just full of stuff that we
junk.
moved in there to get out of the way while we did the floor. Our bathroom was full of stuff. It was just terrible. Our basement was piled up with all kinds of things that we did. Half the time we didn't know what it was. We had construction debris all over the yard. Our garage was full. I mean,
It was a difficult time.
it has taken us 3 years to
Yeah.
dig out from all the stuff, and we have an organized pantry. You worked on that a little more this week in the
Yep.
basement.
So the Grandma Lila's former bedroom is now the girls' room, and that was full of
Uh-huh.
stuff. We had to dig that out. Um,
Your office.
our previous bedroom, when we first moved out, basically filled up with storage stuff, and we had to dig that out, put the office there. What else? The basement was full of stuff. We've been digging
We've cleaned our garage out
through
to the
that.
point where we can park our car in there.
Yep, the garage used to be full that so full we couldn't park our car in there at all.
Hmm.
Now we
And
can.
this summer, we got rid of the very last of the construction debris in the backyard. I got rid of the old paving stones that used to make
There's
up.
still some large items in the basement that need to get out. Big 2x4s and big,
Yeah,
OSB board.
there's a little, well, to my mind, there's not that much left.
Hmm.
I mean, compared with where we started.
Ceiling tiles.
Those are actually not garbage. That's for finishing the basement.
Well, maybe we'll use those someday.
They're
But
not,
they take up a lot of room.
they do. So, this week we worked more on decluttering. Ben has been organizing our pantry, which is really getting usable in the basement. We have a small pantry in the kitchen, but we find that the way we do grocery shopping, it makes sense to take advantage of things that we get at a good price, or we buy a bunch of something so that we have it on hand and we're not always running to the store for it.
We did some research on preserving eggs and all of
Oh,
the.
that came out of left field.
Yeah, well, we're talking about buying stuff in the grocery store and when it's available. The trouble is that the eggs that we buy at the grocery store are not real eggs, they're washed eggs.
Well, they're real eggs, but they no longer have their calcium on them.
They're washed. And once they're washed, they're porous, and there's really no way of preserving them long term. I think that's by design. I think they do that on purpose, so you have to keep buying new eggs all the time.
It could be, or it could have to do with the health regulations that they really don't want to be breeding any.
You can freeze them, but they're not as useful when you freeze them.
Oh, we tried that before. It did not work.
Yeah.
Not well.
You can also bake things.
The yolks solidify when you freeze them, and you can't do anything with them after that.
You could make, one of the things I read is you can make pasta with them, egg noodles, and the egg noodles are preserved a long time. But then that's just the yolk.
You can't do anything else. You just have pasta.
I know.
You can't
Just
put it.
a way of preserving eggs long term.
Okay.
There was a method that I really wanted to try with the lime. What was it called? Hydrated lime.
It was called not glassing.
Hydrated lime, which basically where you just put the eggs in
I
a
forget what the
bucket.
formal name is. Basically, yeah, you just mix lime to water, hydrated lime,
Hydrated lime.
which is things like oyster shells and bones and other things that have actually been burned, and then the ash has been rehydrated with water. And I think it's a component of cement, mortar for bricks especially.
But from what we understand, if you have a washed egg and you put it in there, it'll pick up the taste.
It'll just absorb the lime.
It'll absorb all the
and that's
lime and
not
the
edible.
taste and the flavor. So it's gonna ruin the eggs.
But an old way of preserving would be to take a big bucket and you put the lime in the water, just dissolve it, and then you just take your clean chicken eggs. And you couldn't do this with eggs that were dirty. They had to be clean eggs, and you couldn't have washed them. So you have to keep your hen house really clean so you can pick up clean eggs. And then you just put them in the water, and you can keep them for about 8 months.
Sometimes we get eggs at a very, very, very phenomenal price. We like shopping at Aldi,
We'd love
and
to be able to save them.
sometimes they go down to what, 45 cents a dozen, which is
Yeah, we've gotten
crazy
at 45.
cheap for
Right now
us.
they're 77 cents a dozen, which is still really, really
Anything
good.
under $1, really. I mean, they're not that great of eggs. I mean, who knows how they're getting them that cheap. How are they? And you could never actually raise the chickens and get eggs that
I
cheap.
don't think it through that clearly right now because we can't really afford to get organic ones. So if we're not going to get organic, we might as well get what we can.
So we'd like to be able to, before we get our own chickens laying eggs, we want to be able to preserve them when they're a good price. It's going to be a long while.
I don't see us having chickens until we have a different house.
Until we live in a different place, because I don't think this neighborhood would be very well conducive to chickens.
And we are here until Mom and Dad are not in their house next door for whatever reason. If they decide to move.
Unless we start growing chickens in the basement.
Somehow I just don't think that's very sanitary or good for the chickens. I don't want chickens
It'd get pretty stinky in there and noisy.
We don't live in a chicken barn.
It'd get noisy
That'd be
and
noisy.
stinky.
Well, probiotics might take care of the stinky, but would you really want chickens in the basement?
Maybe one.
You can't have a. You get. Never mind.
I don't think you can. It's not a free range. I mean, it might
That's
be
the
cruel.
opposite of free
That might
range.
be cruel to the chicken.
Anyway, it's going to be a very long time, if ever, before we own chickens.
Yeah.
So,
No, we should not have chickens in the basement.
so we're at 20 minutes. Would you like to talk about Torah portion this week?
Yeah. You want to talk about Abigail's book that she's making?
Abigail has a sketchbook, and every Friday night when we read Torah portion, which is the portion that is set out for the first 5 books of the Bible, Abigail's been coloring, but this week she decided to start drawing pictures of what she was listening to. And her pictures are really interesting because we're reading the beginning of Leviticus, where it's basically outlining all the sacrifices. And she's also learning how to write and to read. So this was her picture, her last couple pictures, and as you can see, it's from Torah portion, period. And apparently, all these numbers over here are how many pages she colored, because there was quite a few. And since this week we talked about not eating fat, this is a lady taking all the fat out of her chicken at the kitchen table so that she won't eat any fat. And this over here, these are 2 priests who have just dissected a goat and put it on the altar.
See, I like how that's uncut stones. I don't know if you can see.
She was very careful to make all the stones different sizes because she heard that they were supposed to be.
What does this say? Different?
Yes, on the back of a book it says different because it's different than the front of the book.
Okay.
So,
different.
The back of her sketchbook says different.
Different. I like how she's writing.
Her spelling is pretty interesting right now.
It's all phonetic, so she just sounds it out in her mind and then writes it the letters that she thinks are most appropriate.
What's interesting though is lately we're able to read what she's writing.
Mm-hmm.
And she has very neat letters for her age. Although I notice our U's are all backwards. I'll have to work on those.
From.
Yeah, it's from FRUM.
Torah Portion.
It's
SHIN.
Torah because U says and portion is PORSHIN. Portion.
Torah Portion. Period.
Yeah, she's learning about punctuation now, so she puts periods at the end of everything. I noticed she has an exclamation point at the end of her numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's interesting insight. She's got one sketch in here of, see, this was when the priest is sacrificing a bird, which you're allowed to be able to sacrifice birds for certain types. These birds have all seen what happened to their buddy over here who's in the fire, and they're flying away.
Because they don't want to get sacrificed on the altar.
They don't, as she said, want to get torn in half. It's like, oh my.
Who wants to get torn in half?
Anyway, and the priest, if you notice, the priest here is looking very surprised. He's got a big round O for a mouth. On all her other drawings, the priest has a very cheery smile on his face while he's putting.
So what do our children think about when we're reading the Torah portion?
I remember when I was young, my grandmother came over one time and we were listening to 2 Kings. I think it was 2 Kings. And she listened to it for a few minutes and she got really mad at my mom and she said, "What are you having these children listen to? This is so incredibly violent. What are they listening to?" And Mom's like, "It's the Bible, Mom." "Well, it's not any Bible I ever heard." Well, Grandma, it's not the New Testament, but if you really want to hear the New Testament, we could talk about Jesus enduring flogging for hours. Anyway.
Well, just a little while ago, we were listening to Goliath talking with his Goliath voice, and we're thinking, are the girls okay in there? And they're sleeping.
They sleep with the Bible on.
They're sleeping right through Goliath, making all those scary noises.
They usually request, as Elena says,
First Samuel.
First Hamuel.
First Hamuel.
Hamuel, I think is how she
Hamuel.
says it. First Samuel is her favorite.
First Hamuel.
Yeah, it's very hard to understand her in that respect.
And sometimes there's an argument whether or not they should listen to First Samuel or Esther. It's another one of their favorites.
Or Daniel.
Mm-hmm. Those are some of their favorites.
Well, maybe we shouldn't name the new baby Samuel if it's a boy because Elena won't be able to say it.
We'll name the baby First Samuel. So then if we have another baby that's a boy, we can name him Second Samuel. We'll have a First Samuel and a Second Samuel.
If it's another boy, I'm going to fall over.
And if we have a third boy, we'll name him First Kings.
I just can't picture us having 2 boys in a row.
And then we need a Second Kings.
Anyway. So we found it quite interesting to hear how Abigail's Second King.
I need 4 more boys.
First King, Second King. You forgot Chronicles.
Well, we already have Daniel. I mean, maybe a Jeremiah and an Isaiah. Just get all the prophets, and
I
then
like Jeremiah.
and then we'll go to 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel.
But we can't call him Yirmiyahu.
Yirmiyahu. Why not? It's a good name.
Can you imagine calling your 1-year-old?
Yeremi. Come here, Yeremi.
That could be just anyway. Oh, where were we? Torah portion was sacrifices.
Right, and we were talking about the sacrifices, talking about it's Leviticus, basically. We ended Exodus and we just started the very first section of Leviticus. And it's like, what are you going to talk about when it comes to Leviticus? You've got basically sacrifices and all the ordinances along with the sacrifices. But we did start thinking about it because so often people say the sacrifices are all done away with. We don't need to really read about them or know about them because, Jesus is our ultimate sacrifice.
Just kind of plug on through. You got
It's
to get through
all,
this part.
yeah, the whole done away with thing. But we noticed something rather startling. If you ever open up your Bibles to Ezekiel, the last, 3 or 4 chapters.
Yeah, it's very long. It goes from
Yeah.
the end time part of Ezekiel is from chapter 40 until the end of Ezekiel, which
46,
is
48,
40, I want to say 49.
49, 47,
It's 48.
48. So basically you have 8 chapters describing this temple that has never existed in history and obviously is a future temple.
Right. One of the things described about this temple, and when we began talking about this does tie back to Leviticus in a minute, but we talked about the temple and we said, could it be that this temple Ezekiel saw was the one that was built during Jesus' time?
We started seeing some comparisons.
Because that could be argued, it's in the future for Ezekiel. There is a new temple that was built after Ezekiel's time. Was it that temple that was built? The one thing that happened with this temple, though, is he gives a description about Ezekiel saw an angel basically measure out this new temple. And he took Ezekiel on a tour. It led him to the bank of a river. A river is flowing out of the south side of the temple. And he describes this river. Swarms of living creatures live wherever the river is. The river flows toward the eastern region, goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the sea. Where it empties into the sea, the water there becomes fresh. I think he's talking about the Dead Sea.
It won't be dead for long. I mean, someday it's going to be a living sea.
And clearly the Dead Sea is still dead. And it says that fishermen will be fishing there, and the fish will be of many kinds, like the fish of the Great Sea. But the swamps and marshes will not become fresh. They will be left for salt. You need the salt. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing. It's like, where have we heard this before? That little game. It's like, what?
Where have we heard this from
There's
before?
something in Revelation about something very similar. So we go to Revelation. At the very end of Revelation, chapter 22, we have, the angel showed me, that's John, the river of water of life is clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations.
That sounds awfully familiar.
And then I went back and I started reading all the other descriptions of what John sees, and they're almost exactly mirrored in what Ezekiel sees, except that the temple that Ezekiel sees has sacrifices still being done in it.
So there's all these descriptions of sacrifices being performed and things like the Passover sacrifice.
Well, it says that every day of the week, 6 days, morning and evening, there will be sacrifice. On the Sabbaths and new moon, the people of the land are to worship in the presence of the Lord. The burnt offering the prince brings to the Lord on the Sabbath is to be 6 male lambs and a ram without defect. The grain offering given with the ram is to be an ephah. The grain offering is to be as much as he pleases, along with a hin of oil.
This is Leviticus.
From Leviticus.
You're reading Leviticus right now, right?
Only the description of this
temple.
temple.
Oh, no, that's Ezekiel.
Right, and the description of this temple is one that has never existed, and in a time where clearly he's describing a future Jerusalem. In fact, it's no longer called Jerusalem. It's called, the name translates to Yehovah is there.
And we suspect that this is the beloved city spoken of in Revelation.
We don't actually think this is the New Jerusalem because the
Dimensions
dimensions are
are not,
so much smaller.
yeah, 1,000 cubic?
Also, because it's clearly speaking of a sin offering. Every day during the 7 days of Passover, the prince is to provide 7 bulls and 7 rams without defect as a burnt offering and a male goat for a sin offering.
Also, it's talking about days and it's talking about phases of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But in the New Jerusalem, there is no sun or moon.
On Passover, the prince is to provide a bull as a sin offering for himself and all the people of the land. That's a different sacrifice than is ever described at Passover.
And the other thing we've been wondering is when it talks about the prince, is this the Messiah?
There's some confusing thoughts on that.
There are some confusing thoughts.
Because later on it says, this same prince, if the prince makes a gift from his inheritance to one of his sons, it will also belong to his descendants. It is to be their property by inheritance. If, however, he makes a gift from his inheritance to one of his servants, the servant may keep it until the year of freedom, and then it will revert to the prince. His inheritance belongs to his sons only. It is theirs. The prince must not take any of the inheritance of the people, driving them off their property. He is to give his sons their inheritance out of his own property, so that none of my people will be separated from his property. And so it's like, well, we never picture Messiah as getting married and having sons. So are we talking about an earthly king here? Or are we talking about Messiah? Because this prince is dwelling in the temple.
Yeah. Well, we don't know. We don't know. It just calls him prince.
The prince.
The prince.
It keeps talking about the prince over and over again.
And the prince actually participates in the Passover sacrifice.
He does. But he presents a bull as a sin offering.
A bull.
Which is never called out in any of the earlier commands. So this is a whole new sacrificial system. But it's so closely related to the one from Leviticus that it's almost indistinguishable.
So we're reading Leviticus and we're reminded that these are ordinances that'll be repeated again someday in a new temple.
It's just weird to think about for us because we've been without sacrifices for so long, and we've been as Christians trained to think that Yeshua the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the Lord and Savior, is the final sacrifice that did away with all sacrifices. That's what we are trained.
Right. And we've been trained that we'll never see sacrifices again because that's ancient, barbaric, that's Old Covenant, Old Testament.
It's all done away with.
It's all done away with.
These are part of the ceremonial laws.
But we're looking into the future here, and we're looking into this future temple where there's a prince celebrating the feast days, including Passover, and offering sacrifices, very similar to what we read in Leviticus.
So as our Jewish brothers would say, this is a difficulty.
This is a difficulty.
So
the only explanation I've heard of is the whole church age, where all the commandments. But that would mean that the commandments are valid, and then you have a church age where they're invalid, and then you have
and they become valid again.
A future time where they're valid again. So how does that work? You can't just flip a switch like that.
Well, there is times when commandments can be carried out and times they cannot. For instance, when the people were exiled to Babylon, they couldn't be offering the proper sacrifices because they had not the proper place to do them.
That's similar to now.
But the sacrifices did not become invalid. They just became impossible to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're in now. We're in a time when it's impossible to do them.
And that's the question, is if another temple was built in Jerusalem, would it be incumbent on us to actually offer sacrifices?
Well, given the promises in Ezekiel, if Messiah comes back, I think that's where we need to go, because listen to this. Here are the tribes listed by name. They will all have their portions. You are to distribute this land among yourselves according to the tribes of Israel. You are to allot it as an inheritance for yourselves and for the aliens who have settled among you and who have children.
Aliens?
You are to consider them as native-born Israelites.
Wow.
Along with you, they are to be allotted an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. In
aliens.
Whatever tribe the alien settles, there you are to give him his inheritance, declares Yehovah.
Okay, so if we're talking about a temple set up by the Messiah, I think we know the right answer.
Well, if Messiah comes back, it's supposedly going to be unmistakable. I really hope it's unmistakable, because if there's any way to make a mistake, you know we can make it.
Unmistakable. He's not going to show up in the desert.
He's not going to be here in this place or there in that place.
He's not going to be in the secret places. It's going to be like lightning that goes from the east to the west. Everyone will know.
So there's the promise for us, though. We are to be considered native-born Israelites. Apparently, we're going to be worshiping in a temple again, and there's going to be sacrifices again. And if you want to be part of the new covenant that God is going to make with the house of Israel and the
In
house
the
of
house of
Judah,
Judah. Yep.
this is just, to me, it's still mind-boggling. We've talked about this for several years, but it rearranges the whole worldview of someone who's been raised in my background of Christianity with respect for what God did. But it's old, it's gone, it's done. That was a different time, different place, applies to different people, does not apply to us.
But now we read Leviticus with new eyes. We realize this is important stuff.
This is speaking of this it does not ever end. God's way of doing things doesn't change.
And one of the sacrifices was for unintentional or sins done without your knowledge. Unintentional sins. Like if you do something wrong and you don't even realize you did something wrong, it's actually a covering for that, which is amazing if you think about it.
I still have to wonder then, what was the sacrifice of Yeshua for?
I know exactly what that's for, because the book of Hebrews talks about how no sacrifice can actually take away sins.
I see.
The sacrifices atone for sins, cover for sins, you get forgiveness of
But
sins,
they cannot take it away.
but they never take it away. What the sacrifice of Yeshua did was actually offer the opportunity to take it
As
away.
God said in the new covenant, I will remove their sins and remember them no more.
Yep. Making an end of sins.
It's very confusing.
Well, also, Yeshua was not really sacrificed. He was a sacrifice, but he's not going to fit under any of the Levitical sacrifices directly.
Well, yeah, if you wanted to bring a friendship present, in other words, a thanksgiving offering to the Lord for your good harvest, how does Yeshua fit that sacrifice?
He doesn't
And
fit.
should you stop giving thanks to the Lord for your good harvest because Jesus died?
I mean, there may be similarities, obviously, between the Passover sacrifice and the sacrifice of Yeshua, or even
The Day of Atonement
the Day of
sacrifice,
Atonement, the red heifer.
sacrifice.
But he's a human. Killing,
Fit.
murdering a human is not a sacrifice according to God's law.
So it's a different kind of sacrifice than anything God specifies.
Right. It may fit the pattern of certain sacrifices, but it itself is not an actual Levitical sacrifice.
Jesus existed in a way outside. As Paul said, the sacrifices are a shadow.
Of
They
things to
are
come.
a prediction of what is to come.
Mm-hmm.
They are not the fulfillment of it,
Mm-mm.
which is Messiah.
Right.
So, again, that's how it's very strange to think about sacrifices being done again, but it appears, unless Ezekiel spoke falsely, we really have no reason to believe that, unless he saw something that was supposed to come to pass that didn't.
Which seems odd.
Which seems odd, especially when it's tied so closely as descriptions of the temple and the trees and everything describes right
That would be
the
a
New
difficult.
Jerusalem.
That'd be a huge difficulty because that would make Ezekiel a false prophet.
That would mean we'd have to discard everything Ezekiel said.
I'm not going to do that.
Although Jonah prophesied that the city of Nineveh was going to be destroyed in 40 days, and it was not because God changed his mind.
Apparently, God can.
Did that make Jonah a false prophet?
That's a great question. Wow. We're asking deep questions tonight.
We're at 38 minutes.
All right. So I think what we're going to do is call it an evening. So we're going to ponder these things as we go throughout our days. And for now, I think we're just going to say good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.